What is the purpose of life? And this applies to everybody. There's a single purpose that we teach from, again, spiritually, that we're all here manifested in physical life. Love is one of the ways we get there, and love permeates all of life. So I want to just make a note of the importance of love. Actually, it's interesting you tied them together. I really appreciate that. Love, we say love is the bond that holds all of creation together. And we say creation started not in physical form, it started on the divine realms, right? So love is what holds everything together. But what were your words for why we're here? Spiritual advancement, or we call spiritual growth, right? Same thing, spiritual advancement, spiritual growth. We all have a potential that we're meant to reach in each lifetime. Now, metaphysics does teach that reincarnation through many, many lifetimes happens, so we're not going to reach the full enlightened state and reach the heaven worlds. It takes many hundreds and hundreds of lifetimes. But all we need to be concerned about is what is our potential in this lifetime? Where am I meant to climb in this particular lifetime? To grow spiritually and reach your spiritual potential? Okay, so what does it mean to grow spiritually? Let's go through a couple of points here. Spiritual growth is a gradual process of evolution through the many inner dimensions of life. We're going to talk about some of those inner dimensions actually here, because that's one of the real blessings and gifts of Barbara being a clairvoyant. She can actually tune in to all these different really levels of consciousness that we go through. So I'll show you a few slides of her clairvoyant, how she clairvoyantly sees these things, and they're, of course, in this book. But it's a gradual process. Again, she says that on average, we live 800 lifetimes. 800 lifetimes to enlightenment. Of course, that's an average. For some, it might be more or less. The spiritual potential is how far up the spiritual ladder you're meant to climb in a single lifetime, not the entire arc. Again, eventually, we do at some point get off the physical plane. And it's a process of unfolding your soul's potential. So let me ask this question. Is the soul enlightened? The soul is inherently divine. Inherently divine. So, but it does go through the evolutionary process. So what we say is the soul is actually who we are. So we have a mind, we have a body, but we are a soul. The soul is what incarnates lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And it's going through an evolutionary process through its many lifetimes. But it is inherently divine. And that's why so many people, that's kind of their hand goes up on that one, because it is inherently divine. But it still needs to evolve. It needs through all the lifetimes to learn its lessons and eventually get to that level of mastery. And when we look at life, you can see all the different type of people. There's, quote, old souls and new souls, right? It's not a better soul or a worse soul. It's just a different place of evolution. It's as simple as that. And we're all going to reach, eventually, the heaven worlds. We have everything we need. So when we come in here, right, we're not being set up for failure. We're being set up with success. So we have everything it takes to reach whatever that potential is. And in particular lifetimes, it can be a pretty steep climb as well. And it depends also on what this lifetime we're not just meant to achieve, but whether it's a lifetime of ascent, because the other thing about spiritual evolution, it's not a straight line up. It's kind of like a stock market graph, right? It's up, it's down, it's up, it's down. It trends upward, and we're eventually going to reach that enlightened state. But it fluctuates because we fluctuate, right? We don't all live the holiest life every lifetime we have. And there are certain lifetimes that we take a very tragic fall. We do something really, really wrong. Not only do we earn karma that we have to repay, but we actually devolve. We actually devolve. And then we need to make that light up in some future lifetime. So there are times where there is a real ascent path. That's typically because it's not the first time. We fell, we did learn our lessons, but then we did something to fall, we can then reach back and climb back up at a much faster pace, because we already have that wisdom, those lessons within us, but we need to, it's kind of, quote, our makeup lifetime. Is that, any questions? I'll just stop there for a second. Any questions? Okay. Okay, so here's the one that I know when I heard this, this one really shook me. Barbara and Dimitri say that on average, we only reach about 50% of our spiritual potential. Again, we have all we need to reach that level, but we only, and again, this is on average. Some reach it completely, and some, by whatever percentage. But on average, I mean, it's amazing how when you look at the things we have to navigate, when you look at, the internet and all the media, there are so many distractions. It's not a simple life. We have more than we've ever had in terms of society, in terms of financially, and talking about world. I mean, there is a disparity, by the way, definitely of the haves and the have-nots. But overall, we can say there's been a lot of progress in the world, but depends on how you define progress, right? There are so many distractions. And then the other good point you made is that sometimes we use those distractions to run away from our problems, to hide, because sometimes we just don't want to deal with the issues. It's much easier to find some distraction, and there's no shortage of distractions. The astral worlds are where we go between lifetimes. So you got the physical planes and you got the astral planes. And we kind of bounce back and forth between lifetimes. We get ready for the next incarnation. So they're not the enlightened realms. They're the higher aspects, and again, we'll show you some depictions. You do reach enlightenment in the astral realms at the very high levels, but most of the time we spend in the astral realms is part of the evolution here in physical form, right? Then eventually we get, and we're not going to talk, this is a whole other subject, there's interplanetary worlds, which is once you reach a state of enlightenment, there's almost like perfection upon perfection. So there's a whole other planes of consciousness that we evolve through. But then the heaven worlds, and that's again the title of the book, we'll talk a little bit about the heaven worlds. That's ultimately where we're headed, is the heaven worlds. So this is a couple of depictions. Barbara and Dimitri had this artist that did these graphics. So these weren't, Barbara's not an artist, but she, being a clairvoyant, actually sees the other side. So what she had done is she worked with an artist that we knew that also has quite a bit of clairvoyance. So he also is able to tune into those vibrations, and she was able to explain to him these different planes of consciousness, and he did a really good job. We actually have all of these that you see here are actually fine art that's in our, we have a center in Encinitas, just north of San Diego. So we have these, the real ones, and then they were made for the book. So the fourth astral plane, this is the plane that most of people on the planet are on. It's kind of that crossing over plane. The lower planes and some of the like plane number 1 and 2 and even 3, people don't even incarnate. Like plane 3, for example, was almost like primitive man, because as a humanity we're evolving. So most of humanity does evolve somewhere on the fourth astral plane. And it's at the top of the fourth astral plane that we have what we call our awakening. It's that point where it really is, we're shifting into really high gear. Spiritually, we make our spiritual life a priority. And that's usually where we make the biggest spiritual progress, is in the top of the fourth, moving into the fifth astral plane. So this is a depiction. This is on the fifth astral plane. And this is called the Temple of Healing. And it's just a particular temple. One of the things that's interesting is that, of course, we grow here in physical life, and we grow through everything that we do, right? Barbara calls this planet Earth school. It's a school. We learn by all the things that we do in life. But we also are taken to the temples. This is some people actually have memories, and it's not dreams. We actually, in our astral body, visit the astral worlds and the temples in particular. And there's great temples of learning that we can learn different things. And there's, depending on what we need. So there is a temple of healing, and this is kind of how Barbara sees it clairvoyantly, the temple of healing. So we're not going to go through all the different planes. So we're going to jump right to the 7th plane, because this is the plane that we actually do. At the very top of it, we actually reach enlightenment. So once you reach this level, you're operating in a very different way. At that point, you've had many spiritual lives. You have a lot of wisdom. You can still fall from even this level, but typically at this point, we're operating out of what we call our higher nature, our higher self. Somebody mentioned ego. That does trip us up, right? But once you reach the 7th, even the beginning of the 7th, you're just, at that point, it's your higher nature that's in control. But you got to also have the fortitude to make sure that you continually, stay in that place. So that's the 7th astral, or that's the 7th astral plane. And then this one is showing the first of 7 heaven worlds. So this is called spiritual etheria. So even after you're enlightened, you still have, all those interplanetary realms to pass through, and eventually you reach spiritual etheria. Now let me ask a question. How many people believe that once you reach the heaven worlds, you are finished incarnating? Wow, you guys are, okay, you got one. Okay, it's always what I thought. I'm like, that's it, I want to reach full enlightenment. So number one, the answer is no, you're not done your incarnating lives. And realize that when we go back to this one over here, this is well before we reach the heaven worlds, and we reach enlightenment. And still we have what Barbara says is about 100 lifetimes of enlightenment. And then we reach the heaven worlds. And even then, we're coming back to physical life. And it actually makes sense. Why would it make sense that we reach this pinnacle and then we're done? When you look at the world right now, not just the great spiritual teachers, but the greatest of the artists and musicians and the people that have the leaders, they come back, and you can come back being in a heaven world in consciousness, but it doesn't mean you're going to come back as a spiritual teacher. You might not have anything to do with spirituality in your work, but you're coming to in some way make the world a better place and bring your talents and gifts to it. So yes, we teach that you do come back, but you do eventually reach a plane of consciousness in the heaven world. So spiritual etheria is the first of the heaven world, so you still are. Now when I say in physical, between lifetimes we do go to the other side in non-physical form. So we do have an etheric body that we go, but you're still incarnating back on earth. Life is not easy. It's by design, it's not easy. Because if it was easy, we wouldn't grow. If you think about your greatest triumphs in the past, and you say, where have I grown the most? In many cases, and I venture to say in most cases, it was some traumatic situation. And when you're in the middle of it, you can't really almost see out of it until you get to that state where you realize, okay, this must be a test, right? I'm not going to run from it. But while you're in it, often you don't see that. But it's through those challenges in life that we grow. If, as you're saying, we confront it head on and don't run away from it or find some distraction or some addiction or something else, we got to face it, because if we don't face it now, we'll eventually face it later. And when I say later, I don't mean it could not be in this lifetime. And it does become more difficult as we go on, because essentially, often when we do veer off, there's karma that we can end up accruing. It just makes it harder. So deal with it now is what we always believe. The way metaphysics looks at it is this: when we do things, and unfortunately we do, when we do not little mistakes, right? If we accrued karma every time we made a little mistake or even a mid-sized mistake, we would never be done here, right? But when we make these really bad mistakes, like really hurting somebody else or even killing somebody else, and we've done it all, with all those lifetimes, we've been the victim, we've been the perpetrator, and what happens is when we do that, the law of karma, it's the law of cause and effect. When we do that, there is something, it's not a punishment, right? It means there's a lesson that we obviously didn't learn, and that's why we did that tragic thing, and we have to come back and learn the lessons we need to learn. So there is that reverberation. So we can come back in another lifetime, be repaying the karma, but still living that life, a holy life, a life that is completely on track. And that will also help us resolve the karma faster because we're learning our lesson. But the law of karma, as it's taught in metaphysics, is that there's a cause and there's an effect. So it's kind of both. You're still living a holy life and you can get through the karma, but and that's why sometimes you find yourself in these, and again, that's we actually teach a whole other course on karma and reincarnation, but it is when you find yourself almost in a stalemated thing that no matter what you do, often it's close relationships we have with our family, right? Because you can't. It's very hard to just, some people do, right? They disown family, but usually it's a karmic situation that we need, again, to, just like you said, confronting it. We also have to confront our karma. It's very easy to kind of just say, I don't want to deal with that person. Now, again, if it's just an associate, that's fine. But if it's a close family person, we say, somehow, some way, you need to heal that relationship because it's likely and very possibly karmic. So we say the passport to eternity is the light you earn. So that's one of the main things. And if there's time, I'm sure there will be, I want to actually lead a meditation so you can kind of just tune in and feel the light work that we do anyway. But light is what brings us the consciousness that we're looking for. We earn that evolution is through bringing in that consciousness through the light. And again, I can go deeper on that and we'll touch on a little bit, but the light you earn, or the divine light is earned with every good deed, act, thought that we do. So sometimes we think, I have to be on a spiritual, like a, religious path or, a spiritual path, and I have to, for some people, and eventually we all gotta go through different lifetimes. We've all been on the religious path. Some might still be, on the religious path now. If it's a true, all the main religions, there's a lot that we can learn through those religions. Some people are on a metaphysical path. Some people are on no path and actually are growing faster than those that are on a spiritual path because of how they live their life. I have a lot of very good friends that think I'm nuts. I mean, if they sat here in the lecture, just because we're talking about all the things we talk about. So they're not on, they have no interest in metaphysics and spirituality, but yet they're just good people. They just do good. Look, my older son, he's an atheist, right? But he's just such a good soul. Everything he does is so good. He's growing. This is, he may or may not at some point in his life get a spiritual awakening. It doesn't matter. By his good acts and deeds. There's other people, right, that are on a very religious life or quote spiritual life. And I'm putting in quotes because they all of a sudden, do these not very good acts. So they talk a good spiritual game, but it's how you live your life that really will dictate, your level of consciousness and your level of growth, spiritual growth. So that's such a key point, of course. I mean, I know it's stating the obvious, but sometimes it needs to be stated. And the other thing is, if you are in a spiritual path, meditation, which is the cornerstone of many true spiritual paths. Why is meditation so important? Who wants to answer that? Why? There's a few reasons, but why is meditation such a key part of spiritual development in so many traditions? Yes. Yes, it's true that technically when you meditate, it is about putting your attention, and you could put it on anything, right? So you could meditate and put it on I want to kill this person, right? I guess you can still call that a meditation on murder. But when we talk about meditation, it's putting it on the divine. And to open up, to receive, that's exactly what you're saying, to open up and receive to divine. And yes, it does take a certain amount of quieting the noisiness that we have, and we all do, right, in our mind, the way our brain works, but to tune in, because that's where all true inspiration comes from. That's where all the guidance and direction, divine guidance and direction come from, right? But we need to be quiet enough. Now, some people are able to do that by being in nature, which is a form of, you can say it's a form of meditation, by being in that stillness. But meditation is actually a technique, and there's many. I've studied probably about 6 major meditation, known meditations before I found the one that I'm working with now. But they all, in their own way, do the same thing. It's about quieting the mind. And when I say quieting the mind, it's a fallacy to say I can just close my mind. The mind wants to be active, but the technique keeps our attention when the mind wanders on whatever that is. In our case, we meditate with divine light. So we look, you mentioned love, right? So what we do is we put our attention on divine qualities. So love, it's actually the deep rose pink ray that brings in, that's the light that brings in love. If we're looking for peace, it's the purple ray of peace. If we're looking for harmony, it's emerald green ray. So there are these different rays because these colors, and these aren't physical colors, they can be represented physically. They have vibration, so they carry in. So that's what I really love about this metaphysics. Which, by the way, this was not a creation of Barbara and Dimitri, who authored this book. Metaphysics and the tradition that this all comes from goes back about 4,000 years. This is very, very ancient practices that was very deeply taught in the ancient mystery schools of Greece and in Egypt, and is now, from what I understand, is going to start making a comeback. As far as Dimitri, he's done a lot of research on this. There really isn't a lot of he doesn't know of any metaphysical schools that are operating in the public forum. They've always operated mostly behind the scenes, but now, because there is the beginning of what could be called a spiritual renaissance, a lot of people call it the golden age, it used to be called the Aquarian age, which again, it's, there's been a lot of talk about it, but it's actually now finally starting, and it could take quite some time to get there, but essentially that's kind of where we're all going. So it is bringing in the light through meditation. But here's the second part, which is very important, and actually what really drew me to this work. It's the application. So you can bring in the divine light, you can meditate all day and all night, but then you have to go apply it in your life. That's a practical thing. So, you mentioned love, right? So you can meditate on love, and you can come out of that meditation, just feel amazing and loving, but then you got to go demonstrate that. So if there is a relationship that you need to heal, somebody you need to forgive, or just show compassion to people, you have to actually go in life and what we call apply it. That's where you take the light that you earn that comes into your aura, but that's where it actually becomes permanent in your aura. In other words, it really cements itself in your aura, in your consciousness, when you take the action that you're looking to take. Okay, 4 keys to spiritual living. So just touching on them. We'll go into this one a little bit more in the next slide. Make spiritual growth your priority. So we'll talk more about that one. Apply truth in everything you do until it becomes wisdom. I want to just for a moment talk about that truth. Is there truth? Is it my truth or your truth or somebody else's truth? Or is there truth? How many people think there actually is truth? Okay, that there is a truth. Okay, so that's what we teach. And unfortunately, and again, this is, somebody mentioned media, right? There's so many divisive opinions and things. But ultimately, there is a truth, and that truth is rooted in the metaphysical, right? Which is when I say metaphysical, it means it's the unmanifest aspect of life. There is a truth. Love is a truth, right? Other things could be opinions, and we certainly, as individuals, have unique expressions of love, and that varies, but there is ultimate truth. And that's really what metaphysics teaches, is spiritual truths. Sometimes we call them spiritual principles, but in the end, they're spiritual truths. Just like we talked about, karma, right? If you do something that hurts another, there is going to be a balancing that has to happen. It's a spiritual law, essentially. And then pursue quality spiritual education, again, depending on the path that someone's on. If they are on a metaphysical path, going to spiritual teachers that are have done that before is an important part of it. And that's why in this lifetime I found, the work that that I practice, and transforming distress into blessing, which is what we talked about a little bit before, right? We're all going to experience crises in our life, but it depends on what we do with those crises. One of the definitions we use for spiritual success is it's not what happens to us in life that defines it. It's how we deal with it, how we respond to what happens to us in life. We're all going to have circumstances where, of all different types, on all different levels of crises in our life, of problems, of issues. How do we deal with it? Do we deal with it with anger, with resentment, with vindictiveness, or do we deal with it with compassion and love and understanding? And that will really define our spiritual development, but what happens to us in life. Is spiritual growth a priority in your life? Let me just ask, it'd be interesting to see in the room, like how many people, and I'll just put it in different levels, where spiritual growth is the most important thing in your life. How many are at that level? Oh, wow, that's pretty good. And again, it's the group that we draw here. And how many people, it's important, but because of a lot of life situations, you're just not in a place where you can make it a priority. You'd like to, but you're really, if you want to be honest with yourself, you're not really making it a priority. Okay, a few people. And how many people it's just of no interest? Nobody. Okay, I figured. So that is, and look, it is what it is. We just have to be honest with it. And there's nothing wrong with any of those levels that we're at. But, this workshop is on spiritual growth. And if we do want to reach our spiritual potential, it has to be a priority. Now, we all have our awakening. And when we define awakening, we're not talking about enlightenment. Awakening is the beginning of the path. It's not the end, right? It's that point where the light bulb goes off and says, this is something that's very important to me and I want to make it a priority. That's kind of when that light bulb goes off. And for everybody, it happens at a different point in their life. It changes everything. You can get through those challenges a lot quicker if you see them as either a test that you're meant to go through, and sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes we draw these experiences to us because we know we need to learn from them. Other times, it just happens. We do live. I know a lot of people would like to think, especially in the spiritual, that type practices, that everything is, quote, meant to be, that everything that happens in life, it happens for a purpose. Many, and most things are kind of a setup for us to experience, but a lot of times things just happen. We live in a physical life. We're subject to physical law. We're unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, there's a mixed levels of different souls, right? So sometimes things just happen. It doesn't mean that we still can't learn just as much, even though that thing was presented to us and wasn't really, quote, planned on the other side. It's still how we deal with it. That's a big, big way we learn is through those opportunities. Okay, work on your character traits and life lessons. So what do I mean by that? So character traits. and we don't want to identify with them. A lot of times we have these, quote, I'm putting it again in quotes, right? Flaws, character flaws. But sometimes we have to work on those character flaws. Maybe we're impatient, or intolerant, or whatever it is, critical, right? It's nothing more than a character flaw that as we work on, we can, develop, and we can, eventually perfect, as in all areas. Life lessons, same thing. A lot of lessons are going to be, maybe you can resolve in a couple months. There's other ones that really you come in and it takes a whole lifetime to learn that lesson. It's usually a common theme in your life. But again, that's where it just takes a lot of fortitude to kind of stick with it and say, okay, I see some improvement. I'll even use patience as an example, because that could be defined as a character trait, but it also could be defined as a life lesson, to have to learn that. Yes, it could take many years, but as long as you gauge it and say, well, am I being a little more patient than I used to be? And you just kind of plug away at a little by little. You will be tested over and over and over. The metaphysical path is not an easy path, because we get tested and tested. I've been in the work for 13 years. I have friends that some are on the faculty, some are not, that have been doing the metaphysical work with Barbara and Dimitri for 25 years. They still get tested. And sometimes the tests get more challenging. Now, they deal with it a lot easier, but that's how we grow as well. That fortitude to say, but the nice thing is you recognize, okay, this is a test and this is the tools I have to get through it. But, look at it as a test. And just like in school, right? You don't want easy lessons, because you're not going to learn a lot if you just take, my younger son was like this, really intelligent, but he decided he's going to take just the easiest classes. He played dumb because he figured, he wanted to go skateboarding after school, right? And he actually told me a few years ago that he regrets it. He could have got into a better college. He could have excelled better. He looked at his brother, who was very academic and no smarter than him, right? Who is now doing very well as an engineer. And he says, I wish I would have applied myself. And he's and again, that's fine. That was one of his life lessons. And now, there's two things to be learned from that. Number one is that now he does apply himself and was working really, really hard. But the point I was really trying to make is, in school, normally we like to challenge ourselves, and the tests are harder. The same thing in life. We want to challenge ourselves, and we will be tested, and the tests are there to see if we really learned what we needed to learn. That's the analogy. Meditating with divine light is one of the greatest tools. And then lastly, it is a long road, so it is about persistence and patience. Certain things just evolve in that divine timing. So we have to be patient, but we also have to be, persistent in moving forward. How can you constantly work on your consciousness? So let me define how metaphysics defines consciousness. So what we say is consciousness is a divine attribute of God. So love is a consciousness. Peace is a consciousness. Balance is a consciousness. Some people may be very strong in one area of consciousness, but weak in another area. Prosperity is a consciousness. Faith is a consciousness. There's many different ones. The way to do it is by putting not only our attention on it, but living that life. So if it is raising the consciousness of love, it's, are you living a loving life? Are you expressing that love in your life? Are you forgiving? What are you doing with it? So often it is really two parts. One is to bring in the power of consciousness. So in our particular study, we do that again through the divine light. So as I said earlier, using love as an example, with the deep rose pink ray, we bring in the consciousness of love. but then we actually have to go live that life. So that's how we say you do it. And it is a bit of an up and down thing. Consciousness is the other kind of definition we use. It's where we put our attention in any 1 minute. So right now, if I'm thinking about, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I hold ill will to somebody, that's where my consciousness is in this moment. If my consciousness is on love or just peace or whatever, then that's where my consciousness is. Even going to something as practical as prosperity, right? We can have a very loving vibration, very peaceful vibration, but be in a lack consciousness. Rather than being in a abundance consciousness, we can be in a poverty consciousness. And that's where we put our attention. And that's, perhaps because our thoughts are on, I can't afford it. Fears around money. Then we're going to be in a poverty consciousness rather than an abundance consciousness. So does that make sense? Yeah. Now overall, and I think this is kind of also where your question was coming from, is our spiritual evolution is also an evolution in consciousness. So we do evolve our consciousness over time. So yes, at any one moment where we are in consciousness, but over time we do develop it, and then we reach a level where it's stable. We reach a very loving consciousness, and that's really where we're at. We're not kind of bouncing up and down. And again, it takes lifetimes before you reach that level. But it's a great question because again, consciousness. I think I mentioned it earlier. That's actually the book that Barbara and Dimitri are writing right now, is The Secrets of Consciousness, where it goes into a lot of detail of how, and it's all about the mind. Our conscious mind will dictate our level of consciousness. And so I'll just go one more point. The degree that so we say there's 3 levels of mind. There's our conscious mind, there's divine mind, and then there's a whole other area of subconscious mind, which is a whole other topic. But just staying on conscious mind, which is our mental center. Now, it's not our brain, right? We distinguish, now there's, they say it's one of the hard questions of science now, is what is consciousness, right? And it's not in our brain. It's not in our physical brain. We say the brain is the instrument of mind, right? So it's kind of like the piano, but you can have a great piano, right? But if the pianist isn't good, then the music's going to be not good, right? So the mind is the musician themselves. It's not the instrument. So you have the mind, but then you have a whole other level of consciousness. And it's the mind, the focus of where you put your focus on your mind, that's going to develop your consciousness. So it's tied to mind very closely, but that's distinctly different. The mind drinks from divine mind. So that's really where we want to put it. Our conscious mind is vast. Science cannot understand the vastness or understand very little about the mind. However, it's still limited, where divine mind is unlimited. So part of the process is, and that's why meditation is such an important tool, it allows us to drink from divine mind. That's where all true original ideas come from. All great works of art, of music, or even the little mundane things in our life, right, truly come from divine mind. So that's really the practice of having that communion. We all will eventually reach that place of enlightenment where that connection is seamless. It's like me and you talking, and I haven't directly experienced that. I'm not anywhere near that level, but I have, my 2 teachers, Barbara and Dimitri, have reached that level where their communion is a very direct, and that's what clairvoyance is, and we're all going to reach that level. But right now, we call it intuition. That's what intuition is. It's just having that sense of right from wrong. So we all have it. We all can use it. You don't need to be a clairvoyant to do it. But we have to listen to that still inner voice within us, because it's not going to misdirect us, because it's not coming from us. It's coming to help us.